Let's begin. Roman Michael had learned early in his legal career that some battles couldn't be won in a courtroom. But on that freezing December morning, watching his 10-year-old son Brandon being loaded into an ambulance while his in-laws stood on their pristine Connecticut driveway, with expressions ranging from annoyance to contempt, he realized he'd been fighting the wrong war entirely. The Michael family's connection to the Bairds had always been combustible. Roman had met Christy Baird 12 years ago at a charity gala in Hartford. She'd been radiant that night, championing causes for underprivileged children with genuine passion. He'd been a newly minted associate at a mid-sized firm, idealistic and hungry to make partner. Their courtship had been swift, opposed quietly by her family, but never openly. The Bairds were too concerned with appearances for that. Toby Baird owned a commercial real estate empire spanning 3 states. His wife Donna had transformed herself from a working-class girl from Bridgeport into the queen of Connecticut society, and she guarded that transformation with vicious intensity. Their son Jesse, 32 and perpetually unemployed despite an Ivy League education, served as the family's enforcer of sorts, always ready to remind others of their place in the Baird hierarchy. Sherry, the eldest daughter at 35, had married into old money and rarely visited unless summoned. Roman had built a respectable practice in civil litigation, representing individuals against corporations in product liability and personal injury cases. It wasn't the corporate law track Toby had pushed him toward, and it certainly didn't generate the wealth the Bairds considered appropriate. Over the years, Sunday dinners at the Baird estate had become exercises in psychological warfare, subtle digs about Roman's noble poverty, comparisons to Sherry's husband Antonio Ruiz who'd made millions in private equity, questions about when he'd get serious about his career. But the real venom had always been reserved for Brandon. The boy was small for his age, bookish and gentle. He stuttered when nervous, which the Bairds seemed to interpret as weakness rather than a speech impediment he was working to overcome with a therapist. Roman had noticed the change in Brandon over the past year. Increased anxiety, reluctance to visit his grandparents, nightmares. Christy had dismissed his concerns, insisting her family was just old-fashioned, about discipline, and that Brandon needed to toughen up. The mandatory Christmas week at the Baird estate had begun 3 days earlier. Roman had tried to excuse them, citing work commitments, but Christy had been adamant. Her mother had already planned the entire week, invited extended family, and orchestrated charitable photo opportunities for the local papers. Missing it would be disrespectful. From the moment they'd arrived, the atmosphere had been toxic. Toby had accidentally spilled red wine on Brandon's gift drawings for his grandparents, declaring them kindergarten garbage. Donna had made the boy eat his meals in the kitchen with the catering staff, saying his table manners were unbefitting the dining room. Jesse had tripped Brandon twice, laughing both times as the child sprawled across the imported marble floors. Roman had confronted Christy each time, only to watch her transform before his eyes, defending her family, accusing him of being oversensitive, suggesting he was projecting his own insecurities onto innocent teasing. It was as if she'd been reprogrammed the moment they'd passed through the estate gates. This morning had started with a mandatory family photograph session in the snow-covered gardens. The photographer, a society favorite named Ricky Meadows, had arrived at dawn to capture authentic Christmas magic. Brandon had been positioned in the back row, partially obscured, wearing a sweater Donna had selected that was 2 sizes too small. When he'd complained it was uncomfortable, Jesse had grabbed him by the collar and hissed something Roman couldn't hear. After the photos, the family had gathered in the grand living room to open gifts, a Baird tradition that was more performance than celebration. Each present was opened in turn, with elaborate thank yous required regardless of the actual gift. When it came to Brandon's turn, Toby had presented him with a box containing a book titled How to Be a Man, Lessons for Boys Who Need Them. Maybe this will help you grow a spine, Toby had announced to general laughter from Jesse and some cousins. Brandon's face had crumpled. Roman had started to rise from his seat when Brandon, in a rare moment of defiance, had said quietly, "I don't need a spine, Grandpa. I already have one." The room had gone silent. Then Jesse had stood up, his face flushed with anger. "What did you just say, you little shit?" "Jesse, language," Donna had said without conviction. "No, this kid needs to learn respect." Jesse had advanced on Brandon, who'd backed away instinctively. "Say you're sorry." Now, Brandon had looked at Roman, his eyes filled with tears and something else. Hope that his father would finally intervene. Roman had stood, moving between them. That's enough, Jesse. He's a child. He's a spoiled brat. And you're the reason why. Toby had interjected, rising from his leather armchair. Stand down, Roman. This is family business. He is my son. That makes it my business. The confrontation might have escalated further, but Christy had touched Roman's arm, her voice pleading. Please, don't make a scene. Not on Christmas. Roman had hesitated, and in that moment of weakness, Brandon had bolted from the room. They'd heard him running through the house, then the sound of a door slamming. Roman had immediately followed, but Jesse had been faster, anger propelling him forward. Roman had found them in the conservatory, a glass-walled room overlooking the estate's frozen pond. Brandon had been standing by the windows, visibly shaking. Jesse had been shouting at him, jabbing a finger in his direction. When Roman entered, Jesse had spun around. Your boy just broke one of Mother's antique ornaments running through here like a wild animal. Brandon had shaken his head frantically. I didn't touch anything, Dad. I swear. He's lying, Jesse had said flatly. The ornament is right there, shattered. Tell the truth, you little liar. Roman had looked where Jesse pointed. Shards of glass and porcelain lay scattered on the floor, but something about the pattern seemed wrong. Too dispersed, as if thrown rather than dropped. Brandon had been near the windows, at least 10 feet away. He didn't break that, Roman had said carefully. Are you calling me a liar? Jesse's voice had risen dangerously. Before Roman could respond, Donna and Toby had arrived, with Christy close behind. Donna had gasped theatrically at the broken ornament. That was a family heirloom. 17th century. Brandon, how could you? I didn't, Brandon had started, but his stutter had taken over, the words catching in his throat. Get up and stop mumbling. Toby had barked. Take responsibility like a man. He's 10 years old, Roman had said, his voice tight with controlled fury. And whose fault is that? Donna had shot back. You've raised him to be weak, to make excuses. That's when Jesse had moved. He'd crossed the conservatory in 3 strides and shoved Brandon, hard. The boy had stumbled backward, his feet tangling, and he'd fallen awkwardly, his back impacting the corner of a heavy marble plant stand before he'd collapsed to the floor. Roman had rushed to him immediately, but Brandon hadn't gotten up. He'd tried. Roman could see him trying, but his legs wouldn't respond. The boy's face had gone white with terror. Brandon, can you feel your legs? I can't, Dad, I can't. Get up and start walking. Stop being a crybaby. Toby had yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Roman had pulled out his phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands while keeping his other hand on Brandon's shoulder. Don't move, buddy. Help is coming. Jesse had actually laughed, a short, cruel sound. He's faking it, just like he faked not breaking the ornament. Then Jesse had done something that would replay in Roman's mind for months afterward. He'd walked over and kicked Brandon's leg, not hard, but deliberately. Stop pretending. Brandon hadn't even flinched. He couldn't feel it. You're all insane, Roman had said quietly, but something in his tone had made even Jesse step back. Donna had launched into a tirade about how Brandon had ruined Christmas, how this was exactly the kind of drama she'd tried to avoid, how ungrateful Roman's family was after all the Bayards had done for them. Christy had stood frozen, her face unreadable, not defending her son but not joining the attack either, a neutral observer to her child's suffering. The paramedics had arrived within 10 minutes. A young woman named Danielle Holman, who'd taken one look at Brandon's condition and immediately called for police backup. When she'd tested his reflexes and found none below the waist, her expression had turned grim. At the hospital, the ER doctor had ordered immediate imaging. Now, standing in the hallway outside radiology, Roman watched through the observation window as technicians positioned his son for yet another scan. Brandon looked so small on the table, trying to be brave but unable to hide the fear in his eyes. Dr. Eduardo Devine, the attending physician, approached with a tablet and a grave expression. Mr. Michael, we need to talk about what we found. The imaging revealed a hairline fracture in Brandon's L3 vertebra, where he'd impacted the marble stand, causing swelling that compressed the spinal cord. Treatable, Dr. Devine had explained, with proper care and possibly surgery. But that wasn't what had made the doctor's voice drop to a near whisper or why he'd asked security to ensure their conversation remained private. The scans also showed multiple healed fractures, Dr. Devine had said, pulling up images on his tablet. 3 ribs, different stages of healing. Old trauma to his left wrist, maybe 6 months ago. And this, he'd zoomed in on Brandon's skull. A hairline fracture to the occipital bone, that's at least a year old. Mr. Michael, these injuries have patterns consistent with ongoing physical abuse. Roman had felt the floor tilt beneath him. That's impossible. I would have known. Parents don't always see what they don't expect to see, Dr. Devine had said gently. Especially when the abusers are trusted family members. We're legally required to report this. Child Protective Services is already on their way, and given that a police officer witnessed today's incident, there's going to be an investigation. The officer in question was Corey Wise, a 15-year veteran who'd arrived with the ambulance. He'd taken statements from the paramedic, photographed the conservatory, and interviewed the Bairds separately. Roman had watched from the hospital's family waiting room as Christy had arrived an hour later, her mother in tow, both perfectly composed. Christy had tried to approach him, but Roman had held up a hand. Not now. Roman, please, we need to talk about how your brother assaulted our son. About how your father yelled at him while he couldn't move his legs. About how your mother blamed him for ruining Christmas. His voice had been quiet, controlled, but each word had landed like a physical blow. Or maybe we should talk about the 3 broken ribs that healed without my knowledge. Christy's face had paled. I don't know what you're. Don't. He'd stepped closer, lowering his voice. The doctors found evidence of repeated abuse. Old fractures. A skull injury. Where were you when these happened, Christy? She'd glanced at her mother, a tell Roman had long since learned to recognize. Donna had moved closer, her voice sugary with false concern. Roman, you're understandably upset, but accusing family members of such horrible things. Officer Wise. Roman had called out, ignoring her. The policeman had looked up from his notes. I want to make a formal statement about what happened today. That had been 6 hours ago. Now, as midnight approached, Roman sat beside Brandon's hospital bed, watching his son sleep under sedation. The surgery to decompress the spinal cord had gone well, but the neurologist had been cautiously optimistic about full recovery. It would take time, physical therapy, and Brandon would need to remain hospitalized for at least a week. A soft knock on the door announced the arrival of Detective Lana Riley from the Special Victims Unit. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. With her was a CPS investigator named Pat Olson. Mr. Michael, I know this has been a difficult day, Detective Riley had begun after introductions. But we need to understand the full picture of what's been happening with Brandon. Over the next 2 hours, Roman had recounted everything. The escalating hostility from the Bairds, the incidents during the Christmas visit, and his own shameful blindness to what must have been happening during the times Brandon had visited his grandparents alone. Christy had often left their son with her parents on weekends, insisting it was important for Brandon to bond with his extended family. Roman had objected initially, but had eventually relented, trusting his wife's judgment. Did Brandon ever complain about these visits? Pat Olson had asked. He started asking not to go about 6 months ago. He'd say his stomach hurt, or he had homework. I thought he was just being difficult. Roman had pressed his palms against his eyes. Jesus, he was trying to tell me. Detective Riley had consulted her notes. We've interviewed the catering staff who worked at the Baird residence this week. 3 of them reported witnessing verbal abuse toward Brandon. One saw Jesse Baird grab him by the throat on Tuesday during dinner preparation. The staff member didn't report it because, and I quote, nobody crosses the Bairds in this town. Roman had looked up sharply. Grab him by the throat. Apparently Brandon had reached for a cookie before dinner was served. Jesse told him fat kids don't deserve treats and physically lifted him off the ground by his neck until he cried. Riley's expression had been professionally neutral, but Roman had seen the anger beneath. The staff member said Mrs. Christy Michael was present, but told them to continue working and not to gossip. The words had hit Roman like a physical blow. Christy had seen it. She'd been there and done nothing. There's more, Detective Riley had continued. We executed a search warrant at the Baird estate. In Jesse Baird's room, we found a journal. He documented what he called discipline sessions with Brandon. Some entries go back 2 years. She'd pulled out a photocopy, pointed to an entry dated 8 months prior. The little bastard talked back again. Had to teach him what happens when you disrespect your elders. 3 good hits to the ribs should do it. His useless father never notices anyway. Kay says she'll make excuses about playground accidents. Mother agrees. The boy needs proper correction that his weak father won't provide. Roman had read it 3 times, the words blurring his rage and guilt warred inside him. Kay says, he'd repeated hollowly. Christy knew. She covered for them. We'll be bringing formal charges against Jesse Baird for aggravated assault on a minor, Detective Riley had said. Additional charges of child endangerment and filing false reports against both Christy Baird Michael and Donna Baird. Toby Baird is being charged with failure to report child abuse and criminal negligence. The DA is reviewing the journal entries for conspiracy charges. Pat Olson had leaned forward. Mr. Michael, given the evidence of Mrs. Michael's complicity, we'll be recommending emergency custody be granted to you exclusively. She shouldn't have unsupervised access to Brandon until the investigation is complete. Roman had nodded numbly. His marriage was over. He'd known it the moment he'd seen that journal entry. But something else was crystallizing in his mind, something cold and methodical. The Bairds had built their lives on reputation and power. They'd abused his son for years and gotten away with it because people in their wealthy Connecticut circles looked the other way. The legal system would punish them, yes, but it wouldn't destroy them the way they'd tried to destroy Brandon. That would require something else entirely. Detective, what happens to the journal as evidence? He'd asked. It'll be cataloged, used in the trial. After that, it becomes part of the public record. Public record, Roman had repeated thoughtfully. So theoretically, anyone could access it? Once the case is resolved, yes. Freedom of information laws. Riley had studied him carefully. Why? Just understanding the process. Roman had stood, extending his hand. Thank you for your work on this. I know you'll do everything by the book. After they'd left, Roman had pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. Harvey Huffman, an investigative journalist he'd worked with on a previous case, answered on the 3rd ring. Roman? It's midnight. This better be good. Harvey, how would you like an exclusive on the Baird family? I'm talking documented child abuse, criminal conspiracy, the works. It'll be the biggest story you've had in years. The Bairds? As in Toby Baird, the real estate magnate? Roman, those people have crushed reporters for less. Not this time, Roman had said quietly, looking at his sleeping son. This time, they're going down. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monsters they really are. 3 days later, Brandon was showing improvement. The swelling around his spinal cord had decreased, and he'd regained some sensation in his legs. The neurologist remained optimistic about his recovery, though physical therapy would be intensive. Roman had barely left the hospital except to meet with his attorney, Manuel Brooks, who'd immediately filed for emergency divorce and sole custody. Christy had tried to visit twice, both times turned away by hospital security per Roman's instructions. Her father had sent lawyers, expensive ones from a white-shoe Manhattan firm, threatening lawsuits if Roman continued to defame the Baird name. Roman had forwarded those threats directly to Detective Riley, who'd added witness intimidation to the growing list of charges. The preliminary hearing for Jesse's assault charge was scheduled for the following week. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Josefina Galloway, had called Roman personally to walk him through the process. Mr. Michael, I want you to understand that this is a strong case. We have medical evidence, eyewitness testimony from the paramedic, the journal entries. Jesse Baird is looking at serious prison time. What about the others? Roman had asked. Christy, Donna, Toby? The conspiracy charges are more complex, but we're building a solid case. The journal entries where Jesse mentions their complicity are particularly damning. Christy's own statements to staff about covering up injuries, Donna's presence during multiple incidents, Toby's active encouragement, it all adds up. But they might walk, Roman had pressed. Money buys good lawyers. They might get reduced sentences, Galloway had admitted. That's the reality of our system. But they won't escape this entirely. After hanging up, Roman had stared out the hospital window at the Hartford skyline. Reduced sentences, plea deals, maybe some community service, fines they could easily pay. The Bairds would spin it somehow, claim misunderstanding, paint themselves as victims of an overzealous prosecutor. Their wealthy friends would rally around them. They'd rebuild their reputation within their protected circles. unless someone made that impossible. Roman's phone buzzed with a text from Harvey Huffman. Got the preliminary documents you sent. This is explosive, but I need more. Need the human angle. Can Brandon do an interview? Roman deleted the message immediately. Brandon would never be exploited like that. But Harvey had given him an idea. That evening, after Brandon had eaten dinner and was drowsily watching a cartoon, Roman had pulled up a chair beside the bed. Hey buddy, can we talk about something serious? Brandon had muted the television, his expression becoming guarded, a look no 10-year-old should have mastered. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. Never. But I need to ask you about Uncle Jesse and Grandma and Grandpa. About the times you visited them without me. Brandon's small hands had gripped the blanket. Do I have to? Not if you're not ready. But Brandon, what they did to you was wrong. Very wrong. And I need to understand everything so I can make sure they never hurt you again. Or hurt any other kids. The boy had been quiet for a long moment. Then, in a small voice, there are other kids? Your cousins visit them. Other grandchildren. If we don't stop this, it could happen to them too. That had been the key. Brandon had always been protective of others, even to his own detriment. Over the next hour, haltingly and with many tears, he told his father about the discipline sessions in the estate's basement, about being locked in a closet for hours if he cried, about Jesse's games that involved pain and humiliation. He'd told about Christy picking him up afterward, seeing the bruises, and instructing him to say he'd fallen at school or gotten hurt playing. Mom said you'd be disappointed in me if you knew I was clumsy, Brandon had whispered. She said it would make you sad. I didn't want to make you sad, Dad. Roman had held his son carefully, mindful of the injuries, and let his own tears fall. You could never disappoint me. Never. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. You didn't know, Brandon had said, displaying a maturity beyond his years. They were good at hiding it. After Brandon had fallen asleep, Roman had sat in the darkened room and opened his laptop. He'd begun compiling everything, not for the trial, but for something else. Medical records, journal entries, photographs of Brandon's injuries, statements from staff. He'd organized it all into a comprehensive dossier, a narrative that would be impossible to spin or deny. Then he'd started making calls to every contact he'd built over 15 years of civil litigation. Journalists beyond Harvey, victims advocates, social media influencers who covered family law issues, child welfare organizations. He'd planted seeds carefully, never revealing his full plan but ensuring that when the time came, the story would spread like wildfire through every channel simultaneously. The Bairds had used their wealth and connections to build walls of protection around themselves. Roman would use those same connections to ensure that when those walls fell, the collapse would be spectacular and complete. On the 5th day of Brandon's hospitalization, Sherry Baird, Christy's older sister, had appeared at the hospital. Unlike her mother and sister, Sherry had been allowed up after Roman had verified with Detective Riley that she wasn't involved in the abuse. She'd stood in the doorway of Brandon's room, her face pale and drawn. Roman, I had no idea, she'd said without preamble, about any of it. Antonio and I live in Boston. We see my family maybe twice a year. I never saw Brandon get hurt. I never knew. Roman had studied her carefully. Sherry had always been the different one in the Baird family, quieter, less interested in the social climbing and image management. Her marriage to Antonio Ruiz had been for love, not advantage, much to Donna's barely concealed disappointment. But you saw how they treated him, Roman had said. The verbal abuse. The constant criticism. I thought it was just, she'd stopped, closed her eyes. God, I thought it was just typical Baird toxicity. The way they were with me growing up, with Christy. I didn't realize it had escalated to. She'd looked at Brandon, who was pretending to be asleep, but clearly listening. Roman, I want to help. Whatever you need. Testimony, evidence, anything. Why? The question had come out harsher than intended. Why help now? Sherry had pulled an envelope from her purse. Because 15 years ago, when I was 17, Jesse broke my wrist during one of his discipline sessions. Father called it an accident. Mother said I provoked him. Christy watched it happen and did nothing. I left for college and never looked back, but I should have done more. I should have reported them. Instead, I just escaped. Her eyes had filled with tears. I won't make that mistake again. She'd handed Roman the envelope. Inside was a letter she'd written documenting her own experiences with Jesse's violence, her parents' enabling behavior, and Christie's pattern of complicity. It was notarized and addressed to the district attorney's office. "I've already sent a copy to the prosecutor," Sherry had said. "But I wanted you to have one too. Use it however you need to." And Roman? She'd moved closer, her voice dropping. "My parents will try to make this go away. They'll offer money, threaten careers, call in favors. Don't let them. Please." After she'd left, Roman had read the letter 3 times. It corroborated everything and added a crucial element: a pattern of behavior spanning decades, multiple victims, and systematic family cover-ups. This wasn't an isolated incident or poor judgment. This was a criminal enterprise disguised as a respectable family. The next morning, Toby Baird himself had shown up at the hospital with his lead attorney, a snake named Ralph Brady from one of Manhattan's most ruthless firms. Hospital security had prevented them from reaching Brandon's floor, so they'd waited in the lobby, demanding Roman come down to negotiate. Roman had made them wait an hour before descending, flanked by Manuel Brooks. The lobby had been relatively empty. Early morning, most visitors hadn't arrived yet. Perfect timing for what Roman had planned. "Roman," Toby had started, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone. "This has all gotten out of hand. We need to discuss a resolution that benefits everyone." "Benefits everyone," Roman had repeated flatly. "Your son nearly paralyzed my child. You watched him suffer and did nothing. Your family has been torturing Brandon for years. Exactly how does everyone benefit from resolving that?" Ralph Brady had interjected smoothly. "Mr. Michael, my clients are prepared to make a substantial financial offer to help with Brandon's medical care and future needs. We're talking about a trust fund, educational expenses fully covered, ongoing therapy costs. In exchange for what? In exchange for you encouraging your son not to testify, requesting the prosecutor drop the more serious charges, making a public statement that this was a tragic accident blown out of proportion." Brady had smiled without warmth. "We both know how traumatic trials can be for children. Spare your son that ordeal." Roman had let the silence stretch just long enough to see hope flicker in Toby's eyes. Then he'd smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made Brady take an involuntary step back. "Gentlemen, let me be clear about something. You're not negotiating from a position of strength. You're criminals who got caught. Your son's journal documenting years of systematic abuse is in police custody. Sherry Baird has provided testimony about her own victimization. Staff members have given statements. The medical evidence is irrefutable. You have nothing to bargain with. Everyone has a price." Toby had snapped, his mask slipping. "Name yours." "You can't afford it." Roman had leaned in close. "Because what I want is for the entire world to know exactly what the Baird family really is. I want your name to become synonymous with child abuse. I want your business partners to drop you. I want your social circle to shun you. I want every privilege you've enjoyed, every protection you've bought, every ounce of respect you've demanded. I want it all taken away." "You're making a serious mistake," Toby had said, his face flushing red. "I have resources you can't imagine. I will bury you." "Actually, you won't." Roman had pulled out his phone, showing them a news alert that had posted 5 minutes earlier. Harvey Huffman's byline, a major news outlet, Baird family empire built on foundation of child abuse. Exclusive investigation. The article had gone live across multiple platforms simultaneously: newspaper, website, social media. Roman had coordinated the timing perfectly. Even as Toby and Brady had stared at the phone, Roman could see both men's phones buzzing with calls from colleagues, clients, board members. "That's just the first wave," Roman had said quietly. "By noon, every news outlet in Connecticut will have the story. By tonight, it goes national. And unlike the trial, which you might manipulate with your lawyers and money, this is public opinion. This is the court where you don't get to buy justice." Toby's face had gone from red to white. "You bastard. You vindictive bastard." "No," Roman had corrected. "I'm a father who's done being polite to the people who tortured his son. Now get out of my sight before I have security remove you." As they'd retreated, Manuel Brooks had touched Roman's arm. "That was incredibly risky. If the trial gets compromised because of media coverage." "It won't," Roman had assured him. "Josefina Galloway knows this was coming. She's already requested a gag order on the defendants. They can't spin their way out of this without violating court orders." By the afternoon, Roman's phone was exploding with media requests. The story was trending on social media. Child advocacy groups were issuing statements of support. The Connecticut Attorney General's office had announced an investigation into whether the Bairds' wealth had prevented previous reports of abuse from being properly investigated. But the most satisfying development came at 4 p.m., when Detective Riley had called with an update. "Roman, you need to hear this. Donna Baird just showed up at the station with her own lawyer, claiming she wants to make a deal. She's offering to testify against Jesse and Toby in exchange for immunity." She's turning on them? Roman had felt a grim satisfaction. The Baird unity was fracturing exactly as he'd anticipated. It gets better. Christy showed up an hour later with the same idea, testimony against everyone, including her mother, for leniency. They don't know about each other yet. They're in separate rooms, each trying to be the first to cut a deal. Roman had closed his eyes, picturing it. The perfect Baird family, held together by secrecy and mutual protection, now cannibalizing itself. They'd spent years teaching Brandon that family loyalty meant covering for abuse. Now that same loyalty was dissolving under pressure, revealing that it had never been loyalty at all, just mutually assured destruction. "What happens now?" he'd asked Riley. "Prosecutor's choice. My guess? She takes Donna's testimony, since it covers more history and corroborates Sherry's letter. Christy gets no deal and faces the full charges. Either way, they're all going down." After the call ended, Roman had returned to Brandon's room. His son was sitting up, working on a drawing with colored pencils a nurse had brought. The drawing showed a house, not the Baird estate, but their own modest home in Hartford. In front of it stood two stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. "Is it over?" Brandon had asked without looking up from his drawing. Roman had sat beside the bed carefully. "The scary part is over. There's still going to be a trial and some difficult conversations. But buddy, they can never hurt you again. I promise you that. What about Mom?" The question had landed like a punch. Roman had known it was coming but hadn't prepared an adequate answer. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that his mother had chosen protecting her abusive family over protecting him? "Mom made some very bad choices," Roman had said finally. "She let people hurt you when she should have protected you. That's not okay, and there will be consequences. But Brandon, that's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Brandon had nodded slowly, then put down his pencil. "Dad, I'm glad you got mad. I used to think you didn't care because you never got mad when they said mean things. But now I know you were trying to keep the peace. You were being the grown-up. I should have been a better grown-up," Roman had said. "Should have protected you sooner. You're protecting me now." Brandon had leaned against his father's shoulder. "That's what matters." The trial of Jesse Baird began 3 weeks later. Brandon was recovering well. The spinal cord compression had resolved, and though he still needed physical therapy, doctors expected a full recovery. Roman had moved them into a short-term rental apartment, unwilling to return to the home he'd shared with Christy. Divorce proceedings were underway, custody already settled in his favor with supervised visitation only for Christy, pending the outcome of her criminal trial. Jesse's defense team had tried every trick, claiming the push had been accidental, that Brandon's old injuries were from normal childhood clumsiness, that the journal entries were creative writing exercises taken out of context. But Josefina Galloway had methodically dismantled each argument with medical evidence, expert testimony, and Jesse's own words. The breakthrough came when she'd called Sherry Baird to the stand. Sherry had testified about her own abuse, then had produced photographs she'd kept hidden for 15 years, pictures of her broken wrist, of bruises, of a split lip from when Jesse had punched her for talking back. The jury had visibly reacted, and Jesse's lawyer had requested a recess. During that recess, Jesse had taken a plea deal. 5 years in prison for aggravated assault and child endangerment. It was less than Roman had wanted, but Galloway had assured him it was a solid outcome that avoided the trauma of putting Brandon on the stand. Toby and Donna's trials were scheduled separately for the following month. But the real punishment was already unfolding outside the courtroom. Toby's business empire was collapsing. Major clients had terminated contracts. Board members had resigned. 3 banks had called in loans, citing reputational risk. The Baird name, once synonymous with Connecticut power and prestige, was now toxic. The society pages that had once featured Donna's charity work now ran exposés about her knowledge of ongoing abuse. Her country club had revoked her membership. The charitable organizations she'd championed had returned her donations and scrubbed her name from their boards. And Christy, beautiful, poised Christy, was facing not only criminal charges, but complete social destruction. Her former friends had abandoned her publicly. The private school where she'd volunteered had banned her from campus. Even her own lawyer had advised her to leave Connecticut entirely after the trial. Roman had made sure every consequence was documented, every fall from grace photographed and reported. He'd given Harvey Huffman ongoing exclusives, coordinated with victims' advocates to ensure the story stayed in the news cycle, and quietly fed information to bloggers and social media activists who kept public attention focused on the Baird's crimes. It wasn't enough that they'd be punished legally. Roman wanted their entire world dismantled, wanted them to feel the same helplessness and isolation Brandon had felt during those long months of suffering in silence. The night before Christie's trial was set to begin, she'd sent Roman a letter through her attorney. He'd almost thrown it away unread, but Brandon had been at a physical therapy session and curiosity had won out. "Roman, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't blame you. I've asked myself 1,000 times how I let it happen, how I stood by and watched my own child suffer. The truth is, I was weak. I was raised to believe family loyalty meant protecting the family name above everything. When I saw what Jesse did to Brandon, I told myself it wasn't that bad, that he'd be fine, that exposing it would destroy everything. I chose my parents' approval over my son's safety, and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life. I don't expect your forgiveness or Brandon's. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm pleading guilty to all charges. I'm not going to fight this or make Brandon testify, and I'm signing away all parental rights. He deserves better than me. Tell him I'm sorry, even though sorry doesn't begin to cover it. Tell him he was always loved, even when I failed to show it. And tell him that you were right, and I was wrong, and I'm glad he has you. Christy." Roman had read it twice, then filed it away. There was no redemption in that letter, no forgiveness to be given. Christy had made her choices, and those choices had nearly destroyed their son. Her remorse, however genuine, changed nothing. The next day, Christy had stood before the judge and pleaded guilty. 3 years in prison, loss of parental rights, mandatory counseling. When the judge had asked if she understood what she was giving up, Christy had looked directly at Roman and nodded. "I understand. I don't deserve to be his mother." Outside the courthouse, Roman had faced a wall of reporters. Instead of his usual no comment, he'd stopped and made a brief statement. "For anyone watching who has seen something wrong happening to a child, whether in your own family or elsewhere, please speak up. Don't make the mistakes the adults in my son's life made. Don't choose reputation over safety, silence over action. Children cannot protect themselves. They need adults who are brave enough to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs them something. My son is alive and recovering because people finally found that courage. Don't wait as long as we did." The statement had been calculated, a final twist of the knife into the Baird's reputation while positioning Roman as a voice for child welfare. Within hours, it had been picked up by every major outlet. Child advocacy organizations had invited him to speak. Legislators had reached out about strengthening Connecticut's child protection laws. Roman had accepted every invitation, given every interview, told Brandon's story again and again, with his son's permission and careful protection of his identity. Each telling was another nail in the Baird family coffin, another reminder to the world of what they'd done. Toby's trial resulted in 2 years for criminal negligence and conspiracy. Donna, who tried to testify against everyone else, still received 18 months for child endangerment and covering up abuse. Their sentences were lighter than Roman had wanted, but their lives were effectively over. The wealth remained, but they'd lost everything that had mattered to them: power, respect, status. The Baird estate had been put up for sale, but no buyers emerged. Who wanted to live in a house synonymous with child abuse? Local news had run segments on it. The House of Horrors, inside the Baird estate where years of abuse occurred. The property value had plummeted. Eventually, it would likely be sold for a fraction of its worth, demolished, and rebuilt as something else entirely. 6 months after that terrible Christmas, Roman and Brandon had settled into a new rhythm. The apartment had become a home. Brandon's physical therapy was going well. He was running again, playing soccer with a local youth league, slowly rebuilding his confidence. The stutter had improved dramatically once he was away from the constant criticism and fear. Roman had taken a leave from his firm to focus on Brandon and his growing advocacy work. He'd started a foundation, the Brandon Michael Foundation for Child Welfare, dedicated to training mandatory reporters and supporting abuse victims. The irony wasn't lost on him that the Baird's crimes had given him a platform to prevent other children from suffering the same fate. One evening, as they sat together working on homework, Brandon on fractions, Roman on a speech for an upcoming child welfare conference, Brandon had looked up from his math book with a serious expression. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always, buddy. Why did you do all of it? The news stories, the interviews, everything. You could have just let the police handle it." Roman had put down his laptop, considering his answer carefully. "Because the police can only do so much. They can arrest people and put them in jail, but that doesn't change the system that let it happen in the first place. I wanted to make sure that other kids who might be going through what you went through would see that it's okay to tell someone, that adults can be held accountable, that being rich and powerful doesn't make you untouchable." So it wasn't just about revenge. The question had been more perceptive than Roman had expected. It was partly about making them pay for what they did to you, he'd admitted. "I won't lie about that. But it was also about making sure they couldn't do it to anyone else, and about changing the conversation around child abuse in wealthy families. People like to pretend it only happens in certain communities, but it happens everywhere. The difference is that wealthy families have more resources to hide it." Brandon had nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Because I don't want other kids to go through what I did. Even if it means people know about what happened to me. You're incredibly brave, you know that? I learned from you," Brandon had said simply, then returned to his fractions. Roman had felt something settle in his chest, not quite peace, but perhaps the beginning of it. His son was healing. The people who'd hurt him were paying consequences. And out of tremendous pain had come a purpose larger than revenge. The final piece had fallen into place 2 weeks later, when Roman had received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, nervous and halting. "Mr. Michael? You don't know me, but I saw your interview on the news. About your son. And I think my nephew is going through something similar. With his grandparents. They're wealthy, connected, and nobody believes me when I try to say something's wrong. But after seeing what you did, I thought, maybe you could help me figure out what to do." Roman had grabbed a notepad. "Tell me everything." As he'd listened to her story, so similar to Brandon's, wealthy family, systematic abuse, relatives who looked the other way, Roman had realized this was what the last 6 months had been building toward. Not just punishing the Bairds, but creating a path for others to fight back against powerful abusers. "Here's what we're going to do," he'd told the woman. "First, document everything. Second, I'm going to connect you with Detective Lana Riley and Prosecutor Josefina Galloway. They know how to handle cases like this. Third, if you need it, the foundation I started can help with legal costs, therapy for your nephew, whatever you need. And fourth, when you're ready, we're going to make sure your nephew's story gets told the same way Brandon's did." "But they're so powerful," the woman had whispered. "They'll destroy me." "They'll try," Roman had agreed. "But I'm going to teach you how to destroy them first. And I promise you, it is possible. I've done it." After the call, Roman had looked out the window at the Hartford skyline, thinking about the journey from that terrible Christmas morning to this moment. The Bairds had thought their wealth and status made them invincible. They'd thought they could abuse a child with impunity because they'd always gotten away with everything else. They'd been wrong. Jesse was in prison. Christy had lost everything that mattered to her. Toby and Donna were facing their own prison sentences and had been completely ostracized from the society they'd valued above all else. The Baird name was ruined beyond repair. Their empire was crumbling. Their legacy was one of shame and criminality. And Brandon, sweet, brave Brandon, was healing, growing stronger, and using his experience to help others. That was the real victory, Roman had realized. Not the Baird's destruction, though that had been necessary and satisfying. The real victory was that his son had survived, that he was thriving, and that out of tremendous suffering had come the strength to help other children escape similar fates. Roman had returned to the living room, where Brandon was now watching a documentary about space exploration, his legs curled beneath him on the couch, legs that moved perfectly, that bore no trace of the injury that had nearly left him paralyzed. "Hey, buddy," Roman had said, sitting beside him. "Want to hear something good?" "Always. I just talked to someone who needs help protecting a kid from bad people, and we're going to help them." Brandon had smiled, Not the fearful, tentative smile of 6 months ago, but a genuine expression of hope and determination. Like a team. Exactly like a team, Roman had confirmed. You and me, helping other kids. What do you think? I think Grandpa Toby would hate that we're helping people instead of just caring about money and looking good. Brandon had paused, then added quietly. And I think that makes it even better. Roman had pulled his son close, careful and gentle as always, and felt the last pieces of rage and guilt finally begin to transform into something more constructive. The Bairds had tried to break his son and had nearly succeeded. But they'd failed to account for the strength that adversity could forge, the courage that could emerge from suffering, and the power of a father's love combined with a determination to ensure that suffering meant something. Outside, the sun was setting over Hartford, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside, a father and son sat together, scarred but healing, planning how to turn their pain into protection for others. The Bairds' punishment was complete, their legacy destroyed. But more importantly, the cycle they'd perpetuated for generations had been shattered, replaced with something better: hope, accountability, and the promise that no child should ever suffer in silence again. The story could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it became a testament to resilience, to the idea that even the most powerful can be held accountable, and to the transformative possibility that exists when victims become advocates. Roman Michael had wanted revenge, and he'd gotten it. Thoroughly, creatively, and devastatingly. But in the process, he'd discovered something more valuable: purpose. And watching his son smile genuinely for the first time in years, he knew that was the truest victory of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.